Books. Books. Books.
Hello, and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that may or may not be an apple. I'm your host this week, Kayleigh Hughes, writer and editor, and here with me today is...
Grace Todd,
Whee!
who is very excited to find out why we are or are not an apple.
We'll get there. Or will we?
Forbidden knowledge. That's what we're here for.
That's because we're talking about Paradise Lost. Grace, what's the paradise? Why was it lost?
All right. Well, last episode, you gave me the Cliff's Notes version of all 12 books in the epic. We learned some things about what epics are and are not.
According to Milton, at
least maybe. We learned about the fall. We learned about two falls. We learned about the fall of Lucifer. We learned about the fall of man. We learned that Eve was maybe still a villain of sorts, but at the very least, she was a richly rendered one with her own thoughts and motivations. We learned that Lucifer was maybe the first being ever to get mad about someone else being a Nepo baby. We learned that Adam was kind of annoying. And more or less, we got the narrative plot of most of the Bible, from the creation of all things until Noah's flood, and then through the New Testament, and then Jesus coming to relieve and redeem the sins of mankind. Although that last chunk is kind of told in summary by an angel to Adam before he and Eve finally walk away from paradise.
They get the boot.
How's that?
That was fantastic. That was beautiful. No one even needs to read Paradise Lost. Just kidding. It's an incredible work of poetry. I really love it. And as we established in the last episode, I don't know about religion, but I do know about words. And Milton was very good at them. The Milton we were speaking of is John Milton. He's the author of Paradise Lost.
Yes, during a famously chill and not at all theologically contentious period of history.
Yeah, the mid-1600s, 1608 to 1674 was his time being alive.
Yeah, when nothing interesting was happening and no kings were being decapitated.
Yeah, and no one had any feelings about where the Earth was in relation to the sun.
It was great. It was very relaxed. Everyone was moisturized, in their lane, thriving.
What's wild is after this text was released, Milton did thrive.
Oh, good for him.
He was not particularly beloved, as we discussed. You know, he was put in the Tower of London for supporting the Restoration. Nope,
the Restoration was when the monarchy came back. Opposing the Restoration.
Supporting Cromwell's Republic.
Yeah.
And the beheading of King Charles I. And he was politically pretty controversial. Also, for his views on divorce, surprise, he loved it, wanted it, supported it.
Good for him.
Yeah. He was all about free choice in all ways, pretty much. And the reasons were like, if they don't like each other, if they're not getting along, if somebody's abusive, like all of the regular contemporary, like nowadays reasons people get divorced too. It's not just if she cannot bear a son or whatever.
Moving past your basic Henry VIII rules and into slightly more nuanced conceptions of why two people shouldn't be married.
And people did not like that. He wrote a whole bunch of pamphlets that were very much in favor of free speech and that were really controversial. But even all of his critics could not disagree that Paradise Lost was incredible. Everyone loved it. It was gorgeous and beautiful. And I think in part it's because, as we discussed in the last episode, he does a very good job of being very nuanced in his theological arguments, in the ways that he balances why God makes certain choices, why Satan is still wrong. All of these things, he threads his little needle, and he is broadly pretty revolutionary in some of the things he's saying, but he's so careful in how he says it that it seems pretty religiously sound and not controversial.
There is a long and proud literary tradition of saying the right thing in a way that allows you to also say the wrong thing.
Yes.
Which we have touched on in other episodes of this podcast with like Marlowe and Rose Macaulay. And you can slip a lot of stuff into a narrative by putting it in very particular characters' mouths or having it end in a certain way that is much more controversial than the reputation of the completed work will wind up being. Sometimes not even on purpose. Sometimes things just are written well enough and richly enough that you can come away from them, 400 years later with a reading that is really interesting and affirming from a contemporary mindset, even if it's not something the author would have necessarily agreed with. And I think that's pretty great.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about Paradise Lost and Milton broadly is that he is such a cool appreciator of language, and he uses language in such a neat way, and he's invented a lot of language. People are obsessed with the way that so many words came from Shakespeare. Well, actually, more words in our modern usage came from Milton than Shakespeare.
Really?
Yes.
Now wait, to make sure I understand this delineation, Shakespeare may have come up with more words in bulk, but Milton came up with more of the ones that we still use, or Milton came up with more words full stop?
In total, according to Gavin Alexander, lecturer in English at Cambridge University, Milton overall has had a greater influence on the English language than Shakespeare. Milton has introduced 630 words into the English language per the OED, while Shakespeare introduced, according to Gavin Alexander, only 229.
What? Lazy.
Yeah. So 630 of our words came from Milton. Some of these are just him adding "un" to things that didn't have an "un" before.
Oh, well, that's cheating.
But a lot of them are very cool.
That seems like it would have happened regardless if you give it enough time.
Someone had to do it first.
Well, no, and actually, out of curiosity, do we know for a fact that he was genuinely coining all of these things? Or, how do I put this? There's a difference between when things enter a language and when they make it into print.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So Alexander's going off of the OED, and that sources generally first time they can find it in print. So there's sometimes, something's been in use conversationally for a long time. Given that Milton specifically is writing this epic where he needs to come up with new language in order to say the things he's trying to say, many of these words were specific to his needs in telling his particular story. So I've got a few examples that are important for him. Neither of these actually are in Paradise Lost specifically, but debauchery and yeah, of course, pandemonium, like we talked about.
It's a killer word. He did a great job.
Satanic. No one had ever used that word in that way before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So indirectly, we can blame Milton for the satanic panic, is what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Michelle Remembers is actually Milton's fault.
A handful of kind of just basic ones, like padlock.
Huh.
Yeah. Fragrance. He's obsessed in Paradise Lost with smells and scents. So fragrance is one, and sensuous as opposed to sensual. He makes up to clarify the difference between like one having a sexual connotation and one having more of a just experience of the senses connotation.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the others, self-esteem. He's the first person to say the word self-esteem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Milton, the self-help writer.
Yeah, what are some of my other favorites? Complacence. He's the first person to use terrific in the scary way.
Oh, yeah. Frightening.
Liturgical.
Ooh. Wait, that was him?
That was him.
Huh. Who knew?
Again, in the category of things that he fully made up brand new. Enjoyable.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
He loved a good compound word too, though. So archfiend, which is one of his favorite ways of talking about Satan.
It's a good one.
Self-delusion.
Oh. He is a self-help writer at heart. Spawning entire industries.
And a lot of times he's just turning parts of speech into other parts of speech, like we talked about. Sometimes it's adding on to the beginning of something. Other times it's taking the word stun and making it stunning.
Yeah.
But this is a fun one, as we talked about with his interest in like celestial bodies and in astronomy. He was the first person to talk about the universe and everything that's in between the stars and everything to call it space.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Hell yeah.
The final frontier.
The space between the stuff. He called it the space between the stuff. That was Milton. Also original and unoriginal.
Yeah.
No, I mean, he invented those words.
Wow.
Yeah. A lot of those are really fun. Some of them are just fun for novelty's sake. Others, it's really notable that he introduced these concepts like self-esteem, like complacency, like pandemonium, like satanic, into our world, you know, that we have language to articulate these things.
Yeah.
I love that. Nobody realizes that John Milton is so important because everybody's thinking about Shakespeare all the time. And it's not like Milton didn't like Shakespeare. It's not like something that I'm setting up. Milton v. Shakespeare, you know.
I mean, they're authors from different generations, and we get...
I think they crossed over by like a couple years.
Did they?
Milton was like a little kid when Shakespeare died or something.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they weren't working at the same time.
This idea that, like, one author is just, like, the author of all of English literature, and, like, you're like, well, we're looking at several hundred years of literature. You can't be the seminal author of the Western literary canon because there's too many.
There's so many.
There's too much.
I feel like a lot of people don't, when they think about the most literature and study has been done of any author on Shakespeare, the second most has been done on Milton, and I just don't think that people would default to thinking that.
Yeah.
You know, they'd maybe go, I don't know, I'm Jane Austen or something, I don't know. And maybe she's up there, but it's weird that Milton's next. Maybe it's just because they're old, and so they've had a longer time to accrue commentary.
So a thing that I found out about Marlowe when we were doing the Faustus episodes is that Marlowe's work was saved sort of for posterity in part because the Victorians went through a big Elizabethan drama phase. I wonder if you know if Milton, while not being an Elizabethan author, was sort of caught up in that same Renaissance.
I know that Milton has been sort of latched onto and reacted to in pretty much every era since Paradise Lost was originally published. The Romantics loved him. Surprise.
Shocking.
But Milton also coined a bunch of phrases, a handful from Paradise Lost specifically, that I don't think people realize. So every time you say all hell broke loose, that's from Paradise Lost.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Those great lines from Satan's big, rousing speech in Book 1. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And one thing about that is again, maybe because I was raised, you know, without a religious influence, I thought of that as like an inspirational quote. I didn't really... I thought about it as like a sort of bloom where you're planted kind of concept. Like, bloom where you're planted. You know?
That's a very wholesome spin on it.
Like, don't be subservient, you know? Like, and there's tons of Satan's perspective throughout this. It sucks to be subservient. It sucks to be at the whims of someone else and not be told why necessarily, and not to necessarily believe in the cause that you're serving for. And why should I do that? Why can't I question it? Why can't I maybe make my own little empire somewhere else? He makes a lot of very well-written, very convincing points, and I think Milton intentionally makes them very convincing, in part because he's so sympathetic to the concept of a revolutionary cause, you know?
Yeah.
And he believes very much in free speech and the idea that all things moral, ethical, theological, political should be talked through and debated heavily.
What's interesting is he's bearing out the inverse, too, which is that if you approach it from the default setting, God is good, God is great, and to defy God is inherently bad, then the message becomes the people trying to drag you into violating the inherent laws of God will be inspiring. They will be charismatic, and you should fear them.
Right. It passes that test for the people who need convincing that this is a very pure text that's not doing anything controversial. Like, no wonder Satan's so eloquent.
That's the one thing we know Satan is.
Yeah. It's up to us whether we agree with William Blake that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, because all of his best language was reserved for talking about Satan's environment and given to Satan for his soliloquies and everything.
I mean, this is a problem that conservatives and theological conservatives have had forever, which is that no matter how you slice and dice it, Lucifer is always the more interesting character.
He is!
He's more fun to write. This is also reminding me of the anti-hero problem in contemporary fiction, and especially in contemporary cinema.
Yeah.
Which is, writers are always trying to create these broody anti-heroes. And they're always, the idea is like, it's bad. Like, you don't want to be the anti-hero. Look how bad and violent he is. And the problem is that they always just come out cool.
Yeah, because it's appealing to have all of these traits. Milton's Lucifer is very much a concrete influence on so many modern-day anti-heroes. There would not be so many of our modern anti-hero stories without the Lucifer that Milton creates almost whole cloth in Paradise Lost, which this Satan is almost entirely created by Milton. This is not something that was in the Bible. This is not a character that existed in the Bible. Satan is a fabrication with all of his desires and his longings and his cunning and everything. It's a fabrication of Milton in Paradise Lost, and it has become the symbol taken as fact.
It's a better narrative. It's a better character. And it's Lucifer as a discrete three-dimensional character makes for better storytelling. And better storytelling makes for better sort of didactic transference. Like, it is easier to tell children about Satan, the weird little gremlin who will hide in the corner and try to tempt you into, I don't know, having sex with a goat, than like...
and drag you into the pits of hell where you can describe the ocean of flames and you can describe the sulfurous air and all this stuff that was never in any Bible but is terrifying.
To an extent, it's really playing on easy mode, because it's just, it's much easier to do that to a child than to be like, well, the abstract concept of evil is always lurking and you have to fight it in your own heart.
You're going to face challenges and difficult confrontations, and you're going to have to weigh your choices in ways that, you know, might cause harm and
yeah, see, all of that requires like actually conversing with your children and answering their complicated questions, and ain't nobody got time for that, apparently.
So all of the gorgeous descriptions of hell, some of which is influenced by Dante, you know, Milton pulled from Dante a little bit, of course.
Yeah.
And he crafts the visual of what Satan looks like, the visual of what angels look like, the angel that we think of as being man-shaped. The hashtag not biblically accurate angel comes from Paradise Lost. The idea that they're, you know...
Very quick side note. Mm-hmm. This just now occurred to me. Mm-hmm. Satan himself and angels being played by humans, those are all things that are in Faustus.
Yeah.
Which came...
Before. Yeah, so I bet he was super influenced by that.
I just realized that one of the things we've been talking about is the idea that Milton created the idea of Satan as like a discrete human being, like as a dude, and Satan takes the stage in Faustus.
Interesting. Okay. And I've never read Faustus.
As a dude. No, I know.
Yeah, and I'm not... What I think... Maybe I should articulate this more clearly. It's not that there was never any representation of Satan as a figure. It's more... I want to backtrack a little. There absolutely was, in individual situations, representations of a Satan character. But it wasn't widely recognized. It wasn't something that became influential. It was sort of... like, I don't know how widely read Faustus was.
It was a play, so it was performed, and it was wildly popular.
Okay. Was it, like... Paradise Lost became viewed as a religious text almost.
Yeah, see, that's bonkers.
Yeah, like, for whatever reason, this became, like, what people replaced in their mind. Like, this became biblically accurate.
Yeah, the narrative version of Paradise Lost displaced true biblical narrative in a lot of ways because, again, like we were saying, it's a better story.
Yeah.
And it's a more engaging story. It is wild to think about, again, as two people who are not super religious, but who grew up in a society that is as inescapably steeped in Christianity as America is. It's wild to think about how malleable Western Christianity was from like the 1500s through the 1700s, and how much it was changing and how much of it was up for debate. It all feels a lot more settled now. Obviously, there have been many, many schisms, right? And so we've got a bunch of different sects.
Yeah.
But writ large, kind of, we've got a few big families of Christianity and Catholicism, and they feel very established. The dogma doesn't feel like it's being constantly questioned, at least as an outside observer.
Right. It's more about, like, how do you apply what we recognize to be the dogma in our lives, and how do we apply that to modern society, and how do we live based off of that?
Right. Like, starting with Martin Luther.
Yeah.
There's this, like, several 100-year period where, like, the ground rules are up for grabs.
Yeah.
And that's bonkers to think about.
But it actually, like, to me, that makes so much more sense. We're gonna go through right now, you know, the war in heaven, which Milton devotes some books to depicting in rich detail. That was one line in the Bible, apparently.
I was about to ask if there even was a war in heaven. I know that Lucifer is cast out of heaven.
Yeah, that's the only line. It's just that they cast him out. And now we have this entire war, and 1/3 of the angels rebel, and Milton invents this angel called Abdiel that is the only one who originally wants to rebel, and then after hearing Satan's speech, decides that it's wrong and is welcomed back into the good angels, and then deals a powerful blow during the battle to, like, represent redemption and stuff. He invents this full angel character that doesn't exist. Like,
Milton out here being the first author to be like, what if we took this iconic villain and gave them an origin story?
yeah, all of those descriptions of how, like we talked about, the apple thing, which, all right, so the footnote in my text is the double sense of the Latin malum, apple and evil, has sponsored a tradition identifying the forbidden fruit as an apple.
Huh.
What are you supposed to do with that? You know, it was written in Latin.
I don't really, that's fascinating. Like,
could have been any mother fruit. Could have not been a fruit. Like, it was Latin, and people translated Latin.
I do remember at one point, and I don't remember why, I was looking up the symbolism of apples in Christianity versus Judaism, and whether the sort of forbidden fruit thing was also present in the Jewish tradition. And from what I found, apples are good luck. Like, apples are great. Apples are, like, considered a blessed fruit because they're, I mean, maybe not blessed. I don't want to, like, go out on too much of a limb here, but from what I found, apples are considered good and, like, special because they're sweet and they last a long time. And
nice, they do.
There's a lot to commend the humble apple.
Yeah.
Like, it sounded like they were vaguely considered, you know, kind of like good luck. Like, apples, great. And Christians are like, the devil.
And there's so many instances of that. And that's why I think Paradise Lost is so interesting, because Milton could read all of these languages, could speak and translate and write in all of these languages. He's playing with translations in Hebrew and in Latin and in, what are the other ones? In Italian and Greek and German and Dutch and Aramaic.
And now for the rest of the Western literary canon, an apple can never be on the page without it being, like, a thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if... I think the establishment of it being an apple, I think, happened before Milton, is my guess. That I would need to look up, but I know that whenever they translated from Latin to English is when the apple thing happened.
Right.
Because it just has two meanings in Latin.
Forbidden fig.
Forbiddenness. Like, because it was all just a loose metaphor anyway. Right, so there's that. Another thing Milton does is he makes Eve the first to eat, but then he also has Adam partake of the fruit also, which in the Bible, I believe there's no clarification of whether Adam also eats.
Really?
Yeah, that's as far as I'm aware, and as far as the readings that I've done have told me. Obviously, I didn't consult an actual Bible, because who do you think I am? That's not what we're about here.
Look, there's so much Bible, and then which one do you read?
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly. I might as well read Paradise Lost.
Milton read the Bible for you.
Yeah, he read like 35,000 different Bibles, and he defaulted to the King James Bible towards the end when his eyesight was fading, and, you know, that's what he had memorized because he's a genius. I'm going with whatever Milton was talking about. Anyway.
What would Milton do?
Yeah. But, so Adam volunteers to eat it after some debate with Eve because, like we talked about in the other episode, he's so in love with Eve that he doesn't want to lose her. Our enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined, for with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forego thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart, no, I feel, the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe.
Aw.
Yeah.
And I know I said this in the last episode about the figure of Jesus, but one of the things I think is really interesting is how much he seems to be refocusing some of these stories on questions of choice and agency, where, again, we cannot caveat this enough. If I recall correctly from my very youthful Bible readings, which I haven't revisited in a long time, and like Sunday school and stuff, but especially in, what would I have been reading? King James, probably? You're not spending a lot of time being like, why did she do it? It's just kind of like, well, it happened, and then this happened, and then this happened.
Yeah.
And
that's fascinating because, like, of course, as humans, we want to know why it happened.
Right. And so, like, he's spending so much more time with Eve and her decision-making, and then with Adam and his decision-making. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, especially because this is a period when they are debating and I think getting away from concepts of predetermination. And so choice is becoming a lot more prominent and important in, like, theologically.
Have you watched Peaky Blinders?
No, but my kept man, my boo thing, is a big fan.
All right, so the theme song, which is Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, it's a song called Red Right Hand, and I think, you know, people love Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, but I think this song would not have been hugely popular if it weren't the theme song to Peaky Blinders. But that phrase, the red right hand, comes from Paradise Lost.
Really?
Yes.
Whose hand?
God's.
Oh.
And it's Satan talking about if God's going to go punish them again with his red right hand, who presumably we can assume to be, you know, the son, maybe, because he's the right hand of God, so a furious hand, which would, if I'm understanding correctly, show a misunderstanding from Satan of how God's son works, because he's very, you know, full of grace and forgiveness and stuff. Which
he's a big sweetie. He's the lamb. Which
would track for Satan's sort of, again, total misunderstanding of how...
He's embittered, and it's coloring his perception of how all these things are going.
He's doomed to misunderstand.
Oof.
Yeah. He fully is, dude.
I know, I don't know, man, because of I don't know if you've noticed, but society and the climate are both collapsing around us at an alarming rate. And something about the phrase doomed to misunderstand just really got me in the ribs, and I don't know why, but now I'm a little sad.
Well, that's good, because I felt that way several times reading Satan's soliloquies. There's this great moment when he first reaches Earth and he's watching Adam and Eve and he sees them for the first time, and he's kind of lamenting that he got all the fallen angels to follow him again back in hell, and he recognizes that pride and ambition threw me down, and he started sort of processing why he ended up where he did. Then he starts sort of talking to Adam and Eve in his mind, like asking, like, hadst thou the same free will and power to stand that I did? And he just starts processing that now he's cursed forever, and so no matter which way he flies, he's full of despair and wrath. Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. Oh, yeah. Goodness pains him, you know, and all of these things that are just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And he sees Eve for the first time when he's about to, beguile her in book 9. And he's almost, I shouldn't do evil, but the idea of feeling, the experience of feeling non-evil hurts. He goes back to it, which again makes you, wonder, God, almighty God, why did you give this creature, no ability to be redeemed? Why did you not let him have the ability to try and come out of hell eventually, or just discover some medium ground?
I mean, that's one of the incredibly naughty questions that I think people have had for as long as there's been Christian theology. Again, I'm so sorry to keep bringing up the parallels, but there are so many parallels between Marlowe's Faustus and Paradise Lost. And there's a line when Faustus is interrogating Mephistopheles about the nature of hell, and he basically says, the line is something like, "This is hell and I am in it." The idea that hell is wherever you are when you have been cast away from God's grace.
Yeah.
Is a fascinating concept, and an uncomfortable one that clearly a lot of people were preoccupied with. If Faustus is from the 1590s, and this is about a generation later, and clearly still very front of mind.
I mean, I think it's just as front of mind now, and that's part of why so many cultural things reference Paradise Lost. Most significantly, His Dark Materials, which is the book trilogy by Philip Pullman. The phrase His Dark Materials is in Paradise Lost. Also, the first book, Golden Compass, that phrase is also from Paradise Lost, and I don't know how many people recognize that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do tell.
It's when Raphael's talking about God making all of the earth. He says he took the Golden Compass to circumscribe the universe. I can't imagine it was a coincidence.
No, it doesn't seem that way.
So in the Dark Materials trilogy, dust is a parallel for sin as a concept, and the terrifying thing is that people will have free will to choose knowledge, and just all of these things that are very clear references to Paradise Lost. One thing that I think is still super significant, and one of the reasons people reflect on religion, is why make a tree called Tree of Knowledge and say people can't pluck from it, That's a particularly f***ed up thing to do.
I feel like one of the things, as I have been delving into a lot of literature that I already loved, but delving into it with a lot more intentionality, the idea that humans are the species where you can put the fence up and you can put the sign on the fence that's like, don't touch the thing. Someone is always going to touch the thing. We cannot help ourselves. It is who we are. And I feel like we have spent our entire existence in increasingly unhinged ways trying to be like, why? Why are we like this?
Yeah, and Eve has some really good explanations in Paradise Lost, where she's like, how can we even know what sin and death are? How can we know what it is that we're not supposed to know if we don't know what it is that we don't know?
There are known knowns and there are known unknowns. Yeah, and there are unknown knowns.
She really... Yeah, she's some Bush era thinking.
It sounds like a graduate school thesis circa 2015. Bush era thinking in Milton's Paradise Lost.
But yeah, so Philip Pullman, author of His Dark Materials, very explicitly was influenced by and commenting on Paradise Lost. His comment referencing the Blake quote is, "I am of the devil's party and I know it," which I like a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah. One great final thing, William Blake, as we talked about, he has all of these depictions, these visual engravings that also help to sort of cement in society's mind what these stories of heaven and hell and Adam and Eve and Satan and God looked like, because he created these visual images.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of them. They're beautiful.
Yeah, you almost certainly have. And they're very beautiful. Some other illustrators that gave Paradise Lost its visual representation, Henry Fuseli was one that was pretty famous. but definitely William Blake's illustrations were the ones that they're so, muscular.
They're pretty defining. At this point, the engravings and the text seem almost inextricably bound culturally.
Yeah, which is so much, I think, a part of why something like Paradise Lost remains in the public consciousness. The Bible.
The Bible.
A lot of it's actually Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
Surprise.
It reminds me of when you slowly realize as an adult that your most enduring impression of like a famous work of literature is the Wishbone episode interpretation of it. And you have to start being like, wait, which version of that am I remembering?
Well, obviously, the Wishbone adaptations are canon. And obviously, I would love to watch Wishbone do Paradise Lost.
Oh my God.
That would be incredible.
We need to start a letter writing campaign. And obviously, the writers of Wishbone are on par with Milton in terms of literary quality and output.
100 million %. Okay, yeah. Here's the phrase, I don't know, rewinding significantly just because I love the phrase so much. When Satan's talking about, when I was saying he, was unable to experience goodness and it, feels bad, the line is, he stands abashed and felt how awful goodness is.
Ooh,
and
rough.
Yeah, and he means it in the awe-inspiring way, but it definitely also means the miserable way, because Milton is Milton. And again, because Milton goes out of his way to explain that only the fallen angels can feel pain.
Which is so brutal.
Yeah, it's really sad. And, he describes the moment when they realize, what is this thing? Oh my God, it's pain. What?
Do what Daddy says, or you're going to discover the concept of experiencing pain.
It's so sad.
Jesus Christ.
Those are all my notes, but there's some things that are sort of unrelated that I just wanted to touch on.
Sure. You were very excited to present this.
Yeah.
To bring this to the table. And what about it speaks to you?
Part of it, I think, is just the nostalgia of, this was my first big, fancy English class in college. It was taught by the guy that wrote the book that he's teaching us, and I, really felt very academic when I was learning it. It's been, a source of pride ever since. And that, I had all of this cool understanding of biblical stuff, but from the perspective of the fallen. And of course I love that, Milton can try and argue that this story is about how important it is to repent and everything, but his sympathy is with the fallen and their emotional experiences and his understanding of why they make these choices. And in his blank verse, his poets do weird shit, right?
Sure, that's their whole thing.
But one huge thing is just putting adjectives and nouns in weird places, and the way that he does it becomes very beautiful over and over again. Often it's a noun and then an adjective, as evidenced by the title, literally, of
Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I was just easily shaped at that time at 18, but I just have such an affection for that structure now.
You get a sick little thrill out of it.
Yeah, I really love it. And then also noun verb. No, object verb, not subject verb. So, example being, I was obsessed with this phrase. It's my favorite sentence for all of college. And Eve is framed as feeling lots of remorse and repentance. But basically, Adam has explained to Son of God what Eve did and that he then also ate this apple. The full line from Eve, when asked what she did, is, "Say, woman, what is this which thou hast done? To whom sad Eve, with shame nigh overwhelmed, confessing soon, yet not before her judge, bold or loquacious, thus abashed replied, The serpent me beguiled, and I did eat."
It's lovely.
Yeah, and Adam has several lines of dialogue when he's explaining what happened, and she just has this one. The serpent me beguiled, and I did eat.
I love that especially because opening with the serpent in that context when she knows, and again, this is projecting modern interpretation onto it and all of these things, but like she knows that she will be blamed. She knows that she has fallen short of what was expected of her. And also, again, a reminder that we're playing with all kinds of stuff about free will here and all of this. But she starts with the serpent and ends with beguiled and puts herself right in the middle there. And it feels like just the structure of that sentence, she's trying so hard to emphasize the externality of it, the who was acting on her.
Yeah, I think so. To me, there's just something so brazen about it. The narrator is saying she's not bold or loquacious when she confesses, but I think it's super bold because it's just one line and there's no apology and there's no justification or anything. It's very brave and honest. I was tricked. The serpent tricked me. That happened. And I did eat, and then like that's it. There's just,
what more do you want from me?
yeah, and there's something, I think there's just something very admirable about that.
Yeah.
And at least at the time that I was reading it, I thought you could build a whole philosophy off of that sort of admission of mistake or fallenness, and that this happened. And what next,
Yeah.
I think it just reads as very brave.
I like that. You found a brave Eve in Paradise Lost, and you loved her.
Yeah, I really do.
I think that's wonderful.
And I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that contradicts it throughout too, but I love that sentence so much. I think another part of why she initially wants to go off separate is because when Raphael is warning Adam, I think mainly about this threat, he's specifically like, well, Eve's the weaker one. Gotta be extra careful about her. The text makes clear that, like, she's still within hearing distance.
She's like, I can hear you.
That's literally what it's like.
Like, look, I was perfectly happy not existing, and then some motherfucker came along and yanked me out of somebody's chest, all ribwise and whatnot, and now I'm here, and I'm three-dimensional, and I have my own thoughts and feelings, and I'm literally 3 feet away while you were talking shit about me.
Yes!
What do you want?
Also, there's a great point where Adam actually says, I didn't ask to be created, which is pretty awesome.
I didn't ask to exist, and I didn't ask for you to make me a sex friend with poor morals out of one of my bones.
But listen not to his temptations and warn thy weaker. And this footnote is, Eve is the weaker vessel. She is present for Raphael's narration and at this moment. Right, literally, I'm right here. You're exactly right when you say that.
I have existed for a week, and also, I am right here.
My little notes, because I enjoyed reading a bunch of my notes from 2009. This one on that particular footnote just says, lame. And there's also a handful of notes that are just things where I'm learning basic religious stuff. Difference between omnipotent and omniscient.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Substantiation, food to body, these things.
It's always fun to find the notes of your younger self, especially in classic literature. Mm-hmm. I'm currently, spoilers I guess, I'm currently embarking on Madame Bovary for the first time in quite a while.
Yes.
And it is my grad school copy, and I am excited to find the thoughts of past Grace littered across the pages.
Finally, as far as contemporary influence, there's a great article in The Atlantic from 2017 that's called What's So American About John Milton's Lucifer?
Oh.
Yeah. And it's great because it argues for a lot of what we've been talking about, how as a self-made, quote, individualist iconoclast, Satan embodies a lot of these things that are, like, very American and create, like you've been talking about, the anti-hero that we love so much.
Oh my god.
That characters who are the main characters of epics are very appealing to Americans because there's so much individualism, there's so much drive to succeed as one person, that it's just a super American type of you're doomed to fail, but you want to be your own person and not be subservient to someone else. Like, Lucifer's a very American very American fallen angel.
I want to flame out on my own terms.
Yeah. This writer references Tony Soprano, references Walter White, of course.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like an accidental subtext that's been building over the last couple of episodes is that I keep accidentally referencing Breaking Bad, and we've just done it again, and I don't know why this happens. I don't even like Breaking Bad that much. Why is this such a, like, default reference point for pop culture in my brain? I don't know. I also, really quick, if you don't mind me saying, thinking about you finding Eve in Paradise Lost and finding her brave and falling a little in love with her makes me think of Madeline Miller's Circe, which I don't know if you've read it, but is... Lots of authors and lots of stories have done this where they take a maligned female figure from history and tell her story. But I don't know, Circe specifically, the character as portrayed by Madeline Miller is so flawed and real and three-dimensional and also unapologetic. And when you were talking about your perceptions of Eve in Paradise Lost and like how much that meant to you, like that's what immediately came to mind.
Oh, I've heard really good things about this book.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I can't recommend it enough.
That reminds me that, one, I think Milton probably made several allusions to Circe in talking about Eve as well, because he loved his Greek mythology allusions in Paradise Lost.
That makes sense.
So many of them. But another one that was really common when he was writing about Eve was Pandora.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many inferences and allusions to Pandora in talking about Eve and her opening up the fruit of knowledge.
Madeline Miller, do Pandora next.
That would be awesome, actually. Yeah. There's so much Greek mythology in Paradise Lost. So
you got your God, your Jesus, your Zeus, your Hera. Wait, no, that's Roman.
all of it. There's all of the mythology.
Oh, that's right, because they're all hanging out in hell.
They are.
Satan, right? What a party.
On like a literal level in the story, yes. But Milton himself will make allusions that last several pages and it'll be like, just like when, and then like, 3 pages of stories from mythology,
Yeah, that's fair. I kind of want someone to do an American Gods-esque take on hell with all of the...
That'd be so cool.
All of the deities that have ever existed.
Honestly, anything set in Paradise Lost's hell, like anything set in Pandemonium, would be so cool.
Yeah. All right, writers out there, get on it.
Yeah.
Give us something. Well, my darling, my love, anything else you really want to get across?
Oh, I forgot that Frankenstein has a lot of references to Paradise Lost. Victor Frankenstein's monster. He's like, you should all be sympathetic to me. You should treat me like Adam, but instead you treat me like Satan, and that sucks.
Yeah.
So that was really sweet.
Mary Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
Love her.
She's a savvy lady.
But yeah, it makes sense that there'd be a lot of Paradise Lost references in
yeah.
Frankenstein.
And like, they should have treated him like Adam, but they were like, yuck.
Not they, just Victor Frankenstein.
Yeah, true.
It's one of the things that cannot be overstated is what a piece of shit Victor Frankenstein was. Very specifically. The book isn't even an indictment on humanity in general for most of it. It's just Victor Frankenstein is a piece of shit. Specifically because he brought life into the world and lacked the fortitude to be the mother that it needed.
Yeah, so that's that. I would like to end by reminding people, or informing them for the first time, that John Milton is the origin of the phrase tripping the light fantastic. That is not in Paradise Lost, it's from one of his poems.
Oh.
But it's a fun one.
It is.
So may you all go trip the light fantastic and get lost in paradise.
Beautiful.
That's like the Jimmy Buffett version.
Yeah.
The Bible.
Well, that was great. This has been great.
Whee!
Thanks, Kayleigh.
Thanks, Grace.
Thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed learning about Paradise Lost and Milton.
I just want to thank God and Satan for bringing us here today.
Very important. We are so excited that you could be with us here. We'll see you again soon. And if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author because they could really use the help. Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kayleigh Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at didn'treaditpod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.